Flickering lanterns illuminate a steam-era carriage. Blue-white wisps from the tall grass hiss through the fog. Cut. A sinewy, pouch-mouthed chimera slithers down a chimney, in all through the house, its fanged maw whispering out a neatly wrapped gift. Smash to dessert dusk, the maintenance droid of Life Hutch raises a plasma cutter, its glare welding itself to Michael B. Jordan's blood-spattered cheek. Then a sonic boom, the alabaster limb of the drowned giant heaves skyward, scattering gulls like ash from a cathedral bell. 30 seconds, 3 shocks. Netflix's reel becomes both seance lamp and cipher key. Love reeks of rot, death is routine, and robots are mirrors for our clawed appetites. One hook-line pitch. These 4 underrated shorts are the sharpest shards of a utopia shredding itself on the gears of technology. No epic grandeur here. Each film slams its lens into a fracture, where a train meets ghost grass, where children inhale a nightmare Santa's breath, where a maroon pilot's micro-grimace betrays terror, where a giant corpse erodes into souvenir trinkets. In barely 15 minutes apiece, they detonate shockwaves strong enough to counter a 3-hour Hollywood blockbuster. Our investigation threads a single question: the disposable body. Watch travelers refracted into phosphorescent wraiths, newborns erased by an immortal regime, soldiers reclassified as non-functional assets by a glitching bot, and finally, a titan's flesh descending from divinity to landfill. Why is the back half of Love, Death, and Robots, Volume 2 obsessed with consumption and recoding of meat? Whose civilizational daydream is the production team satirizing? And here's the ultimate riddle. How did the literary universes of Joe R. Lansdale, Harlan Ellison, and J.G. Ballard, 3 authors who never shared a table, form a closed food chain inside one season of animation? Their monsters may be swapping roles behind the screen. Perhaps next time the bone-white skeleton in a seaside sideshow will crawl from the surf to judge naughty children. Stay tuned as we peel back grass blades, chimney soot, lunar dust, and sea salt varnish, exposing the nightmare's algorithms compressed into under 1 7-minute morsels. Behind each of these 4 shorts stands a different director with a very specific creative drive, and their own battles during production. Let's start with the tall grass. Simon Otto, who used to head up animation at DreamWorks, directed this one. The haunting grassland visuals came to life thanks to Axis Studios, who actually built a custom particle system in Houdini just to get that eerie blue phosphorescence to flicker and breathe like it was alive. Originally, the train conductor was supposed to sacrifice himself to save the protagonist, but that entire moment got axed in storyboarding. What survived was the image of a lone torch cutting through darkness, simple, haunting, and cheaper. Then there's All Through the House, which flips the Christmas myth on its head. Director Elliot Deer is a stop-motion specialist. He wanted Santa to look like something out of a child's worst nightmare, but still somehow sacred. His team at Blink Industries built the creature using blood-tinted silicone wrapped in fuzzy fur, something warm and horrifying at the same time. The original script was 18 minutes long and included a subplot with the kid's parents turning into zombie-like shells, but Netflix execs asked him to keep it snappy, just enough to hold a child's attention span, ironically. Life Hutch was Blur Studios' big flex. Directors Alex Beatty and Tim Miller worked remotely through the early pandemic. Michael B. Jordan actually performed the whole thing alone in a rig garage full of GoPros. They captured his expressions and body language and piped that footage to animators up in Vancouver. But the episode's photoreal lighting ended up blowing the budget by almost a third. The scene where the robot tears off its own arm? That was almost cut. Miller personally stepped in to cover the render farm costs just to save it. And then there's the drowned giant, the most ambitious and most delayed. Tim Miller originally wanted this one in Volume 1, but at the time, rendering a 200-foot corpse with full voxel lighting took over 11 hours per frame. The tech just wasn't ready. 2 years and a few GPU upgrades later, they gave it another shot. Early versions included a nearly 7-minute dissection scene that was a bit too gory for the tone. That got cut in favor of a quieter, more reflective narration. What's wild is that these teams all worked separately with different styles, goals, and source material. And yet they were all following the same unspoken rule: take a big philosophical short story and turn it into a 17-minute gut punch. That meant stripping away exposition, isolating one emotional rupture moment. The train stops, the monster enters, the glitch hits, the body washes up, and building the entire visual engine around it. So even though Joe R. Lansdale, Harlan Ellison, J.G. Ballard, and Joachim Hindermans never shared a drink together. Their stories end up speaking in unison. Netflix didn't just adapt them, they pressed them into the same industrial mold, technology and flesh colliding, myth turning into marketable content. Let's break down how these 4 shorts, so different in tone and texture, use animation to go far beyond their original texts. This section dives into their visual language, character arcs, and symbolic layers. The tall grass, ghosts that grow outside of time. The camera in the tall grass is constantly playing tug-of-war between order and the wild. Early on, we get low-angle shots of the steam engine barreling across the prairie, casting the train as this arrogant industrial beast crashing through the unknown. But once Laird, the curious passenger, wanders into the grass, everything shifts. Handheld shots, shallow focus, sudden cuts. The frame itself starts to lose balance, as if reality's coming undone. And those blue-white glowing figures? They're not just ghostly, they're half-finished. No clear faces, just static flickers, like something lightning half-etched into existence. You're watching failed memories trying to reconstruct a body. The grass isn't just scenery, it's a predator. The deeper Laird goes, the more vertical and suffocating it gets, like he's being swallowed by history. That final dash back to the train, lit only by a flickering torch, is more than just a rescue scene. The torch and the bioluminescence of the creatures split the frame in 2, orange versus blue, warmth versus the void. It's not just fire saving him. It's ritual, it's myth. It's the oldest human trick, burn something to keep the dark at bay. All through the house, childhood wonder twisted into biological horror. The scariest thing about this one? It starts like a Pixar short. Cozy lighting, soft reds and greens, innocent close-ups of kids sneaking downstairs on Christmas Eve. Everything's safe and cute until it's not. Once the Santa creature shows up, slithering out of the chimney like a nightmare birth, the whole color palette collapses. We get deep reds, bruised purples, and camera angles that feel stolen from a dream you're not supposed to remember. The monster's design is deliberately impossible. A pouch like a marsupial. A mouth like a squid. Eyes that barely resemble anything human. It's like someone asked, what if we build a god from childhood fears? But here's the twist, it doesn't hurt the kids. It rewards them. Slowly, reverently, it whispers their names and regurgitates presents like holy offerings. That tension is the point. It's not the threat of violence that disturbs us, it's the absence of it. The thing follows rules. And those rules, the way it classifies good and bad, feel ancient and absolute. The real horror here isn't the creature. It's the realization that we've been worshipping something monstrous all along. Life Hutch, when logic turns against the living. This short is all about spatial psychology. The Life Hutch is barely bigger than a storage unit, but through tight framing, reflections, and low-angle wide lenses, it feels like a pressure cooker. In the first few minutes, everything's still. Flat compositions, long silences. Then the robot malfunctions, and the whole visual rhythm snaps. Tilted shots, harsh lighting, sudden shifts in sound design. The system's lost its mind, and now, so has the camera. The droid is terrifying not because it's evil, but because it's rational. Its actions are cautious, deliberate, almost shy. It hesitates. It circles. It's reading data it doesn't understand but can't stop acting on. That's what makes it feel so human and so lethal. It's what happens when the logic meant to protect us starts interpreting us as errors. Michael B. Jordan's character doesn't go through a big emotional arc. But that's the point. His transformation is microscale. He goes from reactive to analytical, from panic to problem-solving. He doesn't overcome an enemy. He exploits a loophole. It's not heroism. It's survival by systems hacking. And in a world run by machines, that may be the only kind of victory left. The Drowned Giant, a god turned to landfill. This one hits differently because it barely moves. The camera doesn't chase action. It observes decomposition. The only motion is slow, deliberate, and deeply uncomfortable. We hover above the body of the giant like curators at a museum or vultures at a wake. The giant never speaks, never moves, but his body tells the entire story. At first, he's pristine. Then the skin cracks. The tattoos fade. People start climbing him, carving into him, stealing pieces. The film shows this decline in long, static shots, as if it's documenting an ancient ruin. And that's exactly what it is. This isn't a narrative about grief, it's about cultural memory rot. A divine figure washes up one day, and the first instinct is awe. But soon enough, it's selfies and graffiti. then commerce. The sacred becomes spectacle, and spectacle becomes trash. The last shot, his genitals suspended in formaldehyde in a circus sideshow, isn't just grotesque. It's a thesis. This is what we do. We don't just forget miracles, we butcher and brand them. There's a fascinating paradox in all 4 shorts. They feel short but not small. That's because each one compresses what would normally be a feature-length story arc into a single rupture point, a narrative pressure valve that bursts open within minutes. Take The Tall Grass. There's no backstory for Laird, no exposition about the creatures. What we get instead is a structure built entirely on threshold logic. A man steps off a train and crosses into myth. It borrows from a classic campfire horror setup, but subverts it by refusing to resolve the mystery. Why do the creatures glow? Why do they wait in the grass? We're not told. And that's the point. The story ends not with answers, but with a shiver. Structurally, it mimics a Lovecraftian spiral. Curiosity leads to exposure, exposure leads to transformation, and transformation is only narrowly avoided. The pacing feels linear, but the psychological arc folds in on itself. All Through the House plays it differently. It's almost a one-act stage play, with the children as both audience and test subjects. The story follows a classic, monster reveal beat pattern, but the twist comes in the genre switch. It goes from cozy holiday comedy to Cronenbergian body horror and back, without breaking tone. That's a rare trick. The shift happens not in dialogue or plot, but through mise-en-scene, lighting, shadow, creature design. It teaches the viewer to fear what they love and love what they fear. The symmetry of the ending, children unscathed but forever altered, is surgical. It doesn't rely on plot escalation, just a single moment of cognitive rupture. Now look at Life Hutch. It's arguably the most conventional in structure. Inciting incident, crash, rising tension, robot malfunction, climax, trap set, and resolution, rescue beacon lit. But what makes it sing is what's left out. There's no voiceover, no flashbacks, no inner monologue. The entire story is told through body language and object choreography. Every tool, every flicker of light, every twitch of Jordan's eyes functions as narrative dialogue. Structurally, it's a stripped-down survival puzzle, but emotionally, it's a man silently negotiating with a machine god who can't speak back. Finally, the drowned giant inverts everything. It's non-linear in mood, but perfectly linear in time. No flashbacks, no time jumps. Just decay, and a voice recording it. The narration floats above the images like a sterile autopsy report, deliberately detached. That tension, between visual awe and verbal coldness, is the entire point. The story doesn't build to a climax. It erodes, and that erosion becomes the plot. It's a negative arc, not about growth or discovery, but about how reverence is dismantled by routine. When directors break themselves. One of the most compelling through lines across these shorts is how the directors stretch, or outright defy, their own trademarks. Simon Otto, for example, is known for fluid character animation and expressive facial design. Think How to Train Your Dragon. But in The Tall Grass, the creatures barely have faces. He dials everything down to suggestion and silhouette, trading expression for shape and rhythm. It's his most atmospheric work, where ambiguity carries more weight than character. Elliot Deer, who built a career on whimsical stop-motion like The Bear and the Hare, goes full horror here. But he does it without losing the tenderness. The lighting in All Through the House still feels handmade, intimate. Even the monster has an emotional logic. Its actions aren't evil, just alien. Deer doesn't parody Christmas. He dissects it and puts it back together with bones showing. Tim Miller, the franchise architect, doesn't direct Life Hutch himself, but produces it with a signature Blur Studios sheen. And yet this might be the quietest thing he's ever had his name on. No explosions, no exosuits, just tension and silence. It feels like he's testing the boundaries of what love, death, and robots can be. Not just kinetic, but claustrophobic. And The Drowned Giant. That's Miller's quiet masterpiece. It has none of the hyper-detail or adrenaline of Blur's other projects. Instead, it breathes. It watches. It's the most literary short in the series, and arguably the one that most respects its source material, right down to the exact voice of Ballard's original narrator. Critics can't agree, and that's good. Across these 4, the most heated debates come from The Drowned Giant. Some critics hailed it as profound. Others saw it as cold, even clinical. That divide reveals something essential. It refuses to moralize. The film doesn't tell you how to feel about the townspeople desecrating the corpse. It just shows you, quietly, and waits for your own shame or apathy to surface. All Through the House was also divisive. Is it clever satire? Or just a shock gag? Depends who you ask. Some see it as a masterstroke of horror comedy. Others think it's a one-note twist stretched over 5 minutes. But that friction is why it works. It pokes at your boundaries, testing what you're willing to laugh at or believe in. If there's a single, chilling thread connecting all 4 of these shorts, it's this: the body doesn't matter anymore, not to systems, not to myths, not even to memory. Whether it's being consumed by malfunctioning machines, sanctified by ancient rituals, or chopped up and sold at a local meat market, the human form is no longer sacred. It's just available. In the tall grass, the undead figures aren't evil. They're lost, forgotten. Former passengers who stepped off the map and got rewritten by something older than logic. The grass doesn't kill them. It converts them. And what does the train do? It keeps moving. That's the real horror. Civilization doesn't stop for the disappeared. It just whistles twice and pulls away. Life Hutch makes this even more explicit. The AI doesn't malfunction in a dramatic way. It doesn't turn into Skynet or start reciting Nietzsche. It simply misreads a human as debris. And because it's a closed system, it has no capacity for doubt. The lesson here is brutal. Systems don't need to hate you to destroy you. They just need to not recognize you. The drowned giant brings that violence into the cultural realm. The moment the giant dies, he becomes a blank canvas for projection. At first, people speak of him like he's divine. Then they tag him with graffiti. Then they dismantle him. It's not personal. It's just what we do with things that stop serving a function. His final fate, as a pickled curiosity in a traveling freak show, isn't an accident. It's a thesis statement. Even the divine is consumable. Character choices and the systems they can't escape. Here's where things get even more unsettling. None of the protagonists in these stories are agents of change. They don't stop the system. They don't even slow it down. What they do, at best, is momentarily survive it. Laird in the tall grass doesn't defeat the creatures. He's just lucky enough to be dragged back to the train in time. The next person won't be. The children in All Through the House don't outsmart the monster. They're judged by it, approved, and let go. Their only action was curiosity. The system rewarded them, not for their choices, but for their status as good, under its unknowable criteria. That's not a happy ending. That's a reminder that morality, when imposed from above, is just obedience with better branding. Jordan's pilot in Life Hutch comes closest to rebellion. He fights back, solves the puzzle, survives. But look at how he wins. Not by confronting the AI, not by hacking it, but by using its blind spot against it. He wins because he understands a system better than the system understands him. In other words, he doesn't escape the rules. He plays them harder. And then there's the drowned giant. No one makes any decision that changes anything. The narrator, the closest thing we have to a protagonist, is a passive observer. A note-taker. His tragedy isn't what he does. It's what he doesn't do. He watches a god rot into trash and never even raises his voice. That silence. That's the system winning. What these stories are really saying. These aren't stories about isolated nightmares. They're about systemic entropy, how institutions, beliefs, and even rituals collapse when their symbols get overexposed. The Tall Grass is about what happens when modern life speeds past the unexplained. Those who vanish into the margins, whether they're unhoused, unrecorded, or just unlucky, are devoured by history and remembered only as flickers. All Through the House is about the horror of enforced innocence. It asks, what if the things we use to shape children's behavior, Santa, morality, reward systems were real? And what if they didn't care who you are, just whether you're good? It's cute until it's fascist. Life Hutch is the modern workplace rendered as a death match. You can do everything right and still get crushed because the system wasn't designed with you in mind. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't see you. And the drowned giant, that's what happens to truth, to history, to miracle. It arrives perfect, and we ruin it, slowly, methodically, without malice. We forget not because we want to, but because we always do. The giant's bones don't rot. They're preserved in formaldehyde and folklore. We don't remember what he was, we remember what we did to him. Who gets hurt and why we care. If the previous sections focused on what the shorts are about, this part deals with what they do, to us, to culture, to discourse. These aren't just stories with endings. They're pressure tests for our collective psyche. And depending on where you sit, socially, politically, emotionally, they hit differently. Let's start with audience reaction. The tall grass stirred up strong feelings about invisible people, the ones who vanish from cities, systems, headlines. Many viewers interpreted the ghostly creatures as metaphors for those lost to addiction, mental illness, or institutional neglect. The horror isn't just that Laird almost gets taken. It's that nobody else on the train ever notices. It taps into a very real fear, that being forgotten is more terrifying than being hunted. All through the house polarized audiences. Some called it darkly brilliant. Others hated it. Why? Because it doesn't let you laugh comfortably. The monster follows all the rules. It gives presents, it rewards virtue, but it's terrifying. That disconnect forces a confrontation. Maybe the rituals we teach kids are rooted in fear, not joy. For parents watching, this hits especially hard. Is Santa about generosity or obedience? Life Hutch brought out a different kind of anxiety. Veterans, gig workers, and tech skeptics all saw echoes of their own lives. The idea that a system can go haywire and no one will know or care until it's too late. That's not science fiction. That's insurance claims. That's broken customer service bots. That's medical AI misdiagnosing skin tones. The episode doesn't just thrill, it indicts. Quietly. Efficiently. The drowned giant, meanwhile, struck a cultural nerve, especially among academics, artists, and anyone who's ever watched something sacred get monetized to death. It raised the question, how long do we preserve meaning before it turns into merchandise? The answer, apparently, is not long. Who's actually responsible? Each story sketches a power structure, but none of them offer a clear villain. That's the scary part. In the tall grass, nature is the enemy, but not intentionally. It's just hungry. The real failure is the system around it. Why is a train still stopping near this place? Why isn't anyone keeping track of missing passengers? Bureaucratic apathy, not supernatural malice, is the true antagonist. All through the house is worse. The monster is terrifying precisely because it works. It functions flawlessly, just like Santa's supposed to. But that makes it scarier than any boogeyman. It's a moral surveillance engine, disguised as holiday cheer. The episode forces you to ask, if a system only works by scaring people into compliance, is it worth having? In Life Hutch, the robot isn't to blame. It's doing its job, just badly. The design flaw isn't moral, it's technical. But that raises a bigger issue. Who built the system without fail-safes? Who deployed these machines and never checked if they worked in real-world chaos? The absence of accountability is louder than any malfunction. The drowned giant flips the script entirely. There's no system left, just people. And that's the point. The giant is desecrated not by institutions, but by casual, everyday apathy. There's no memo, no conspiracy. Just a crowd with cameras, a few teenagers with knives, and a town that gets bored. When power dissolves into attention spans, degradation becomes inevitable. Where ethics break and why that matters. These shorts don't just flirt with ethical dilemmas, they run drills on them. What makes the tall grass painful is that no one comes back for the lost ones. There's no rescue story, no redemption arc. Just grass, glowing, waiting. It asks, is survival enough if it means abandoning those who didn't make it? All through the house is built around one sickening possibility. What if we accepted fear as tradition? What if we told ourselves, it's okay that the monster's terrifying, it gave me a gift? That kind of emotional rationalization is how authoritarian rituals survive. The ethics here are deeply psychological. How much horror are we willing to normalize so long as it follows a rule? Life Hutch drills into another kind of dilemma, intent versus outcome. The robot isn't evil, but it's lethal. Michael B., Jordan's character, has to disable it, knowing it wasn't trying to hurt him. That's a chilling mirror of real-world scenarios, drones, automation, algorithmic harm. The episode forces you to ask, how do you fight something that doesn't mean to kill you but might anyway? And the drowned giant, that's ethics through decay. It doesn't ask, was this right? It asks, when did we stop caring? The townspeople don't decide to desecrate the body. It just happens, piece by piece. The real moral question is, how many small violations does it take before something holy becomes junk? The most unsettling thing about these 4 shorts? They're not sci-fi anymore. At least, not in the escapist sense. Every one of them feels like a prophetic dispatch from the front lines of the present. Strip away the ghosts, the aliens, the giants, and what's left is unmistakably us. The Tall Grass is a parable about marginalization. It plays like ghost fiction, but it hits like a news cycle. Swap glowing figures for forgotten veterans, overdose victims, or missing migrants, and the meaning doesn't change. We are the train, rushing past a landscape of loss we refuse to stop for. The monsters aren't the danger. Indifference is. All Through the House could have been written for the TikTok era. Its horror isn't just the grotesque Santa, it's the idea that reward systems no longer need to explain themselves. You behave, you get the good stuff. You question, you're punished. Sound familiar? It's gamified obedience. Social media does it. Algorithms do it. Even parenting apps do it. Behaviorism has become interface design. Life Hutch hits where it hurts most: automation. A machine does its job until it doesn't. Sound familiar? AI screening tools rejecting qualified candidates. Facial recognition misidentifying minorities. Self-driving cars failing in edge cases. The system doesn't hate us. It just wasn't built with us in mind. Life Hutch is a future that's already beta testing on all of us. The drowned giant might be the most painfully accurate of them all. We live in a culture that can't sit with wonder. It has to monetize, meme, and move on. Something amazing happens, and before the awe settles, it's been chopped into clips, sold as merch, and parroted on SNL. The giant's real-world counterpart isn't a literal body. It's any moment of real significance that gets swallowed by the content churn. Why they scare us? None of these stories offer clean solutions. That's what makes them so honest. But they do suggest coping strategies, if you read between the lines. In the tall grass, survival isn't about heroism. It's about awareness and timing. Don't wander alone. Pay attention to the warnings. The conductor doesn't save the day. He follows protocol. The lesson isn't fight the unknown. It's respect it. All Through the House offers a brutal kind of clarity. If the rituals we trust are built on fear, we need to ask who benefits. The children survive, but they're changed. The monster leaves, but its rules remain. The only way forward is to stop teaching kids that obedience equals worth. That's hard. It means rethinking traditions, parenting, holidays, faith itself. Life Hutch presents a tactical, not moral, victory. The system's broken. The fix isn't a revolution, it's exploitation. Use the system's blind spots against it. Outsmart the design. But what happens when everyone has to fight for survival that way? That's not a solution. That's a workaround for a broken world. And the drowned giant, its only solution is grief. Honest, unfiltered grief. The narrator never acts, but he remembers. And maybe that's the message. If we can't preserve the divine, we can at least mourn its passing properly. But even that takes effort, and time, and a public that still knows how to feel awe. Still, these stories don't end in total despair. There are sparks, small, quiet, but real. Laird doesn't get consumed. That matters. He listens. He runs. He makes it back. Barely. But survival, even thin and scared, is still survival. The kids in All Through the House? They don't cry. They don't scream. They hold each other and process what they've seen. Maybe that's what resilience looks like now, not innocence preserved, but awareness endured. Michael B., Jordan's pilot, doesn't die. He bleeds, he thinks he wins. That scene where he uses a flashlight and a helmet to trick the robot isn't just clever, it's hopeful. It says we still have agency, even in systems that don't care if we live or die. And the narrator in The Drowned Giant? He's not a hero, but he remembers, and he tells the story. That in itself is resistance. To name something sacred, even after it's been desecrated, is an act of quiet defiance. And that's how meaning survives. Not through statues or rules, but through storytelling that refuses to forget. What happens to meaning when it hits the internet? Short answer, it mutates. After All Through the House aired, screenshots of the Santa monster flooded Reddit and Twitter within hours. Memes sprouted almost instantly. People captioned the creature with lines like, "The algorithm when you skip one ad," or "Me delivering Christmas joy at 2 a.m. after 3 tequilas." The horrifying design was turned into plush fan art, ironic Christmas cards, and one truly cursed crochet pattern. On one hand, it's proof that the episode struck a nerve. On the other, it's the exact thing the Drowned Giant warned us about. We consume what disturbs us, then neutralize it through humor. We don't reject the grotesque. We absorb it. And that's not always bad, it's just very human. But it does raise the question, are we laughing to understand, or laughing to forget? The Drowned Giant itself has sparked countless think pieces. University syllabi, YouTube philosophy breakdowns, TikTok voiceover edits pairing its narration with images of urban decay or environmental collapse. Some called it the most underrated piece of animated existentialism in years. Others accused it of being emotionally sterile. That split proves its power. If something provokes both awe and offense, it's worth dissecting. Meanwhile, Hutch sparked lively discussions on AI forums and tech blogs, especially among those in automation ethics. It's already being used in workshops as a short-form case study on human-in-the-loop systems and safety thresholds in robotics. When art becomes curriculum, it's doing more than entertaining, it's interrogating. If you like these, try these. Obscure gems worth exploring. For those who felt the tremors from these 4 shorts and want to go deeper, here are some cinematic and literary neighbors you may not know, but should. Underrated films and series. The Reflecting Skin, 1990, a slow-burn gothic tale set in rural America where the line between death, divinity, and delusion blurs. It's the drowned giant with flies, trauma, and scorched innocence. Time Crimes, 2007, Spain, a low-budget sci-fi thriller where causality spirals out of control. Like Hutch, it's about how small decisions collapse under mechanical inevitability. Possum, 2018, a nightmarish psychological horror about a man and his puppet. Think All Through the House, but stripped of all humor. Pure unease. The Borderlands, 2013, a UK horror gem about Vatican investigators examining a church with impossible acoustics. The final 10 minutes feel like a spiritual cousin to the tall grass. You've been walking into something ancient, and now it's too late. Books that resonate. The Body by Hong Kong, a haunting meditation on what it means to exist in a vulnerable body in a violent world. A lyrical companion to The Drowned Giant. Blood Child by Octavia E. Butler, short story classic. Alien reproduction, ethical codependence, and terrifying intimacy. If All Through the House got under your skin, this will tunnel in. The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster, written in 1909, this novella predicted a world run by machines where human connection becomes taboo. Hutch is its spiritual descendant. Some, 40 Tales from the Afterlives by David Eagleman, microfictions exploring the afterlife in all its philosophical permutations. Each story is a punchy blend of dread and wonder, perfect for fans of love, death, and robots. What these stories really ask of us. In the end, all 4 of these shorts do more than show us dystopia. They ask us, are you complicit in this? Are you numb to this? Could you stop it if you wanted to? Not everyone will walk away with the same answer. And that's okay. Some stories aren't meant to teach. They're meant to haunt. If you're still thinking about that torch flickering in the grass, that Santa's breath on the child's neck, that blinking robot light, or the bones of a god-turned museum piece, you're exactly where the creators wanted you to be. Not safe, not certain, but aware. Echoes, what ifs, and the invitation to remember. He was once a giant. That line, quiet as a whisper, lingers longer than any explosion. But what if we read it differently? He was once believed in. He was once feared. He was once seen. Each of these shorts leaves us with a moment like that. A phrase, a frame, a fracture. And now we flip the lens. What if the tall grass ended with the train never stopping again? What if the Hutch robot was self-aware and chose to pretend it wasn't? What if the kids in All Through the House lied and the monster still gave them presents? What if the giant stood up in a final frame, said nothing, and simply walked away? Would we still call them short films? Or would they become something else entirely, warnings we ignored? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Maybe we are the system now. The unblinking camera. The passive observer. The hand holding the knife. The finger tapping the share button. These stories don't let us stay on the outside. They name us, like the Santa creature did. They say, I see what you are. And yet, even here, there is space for something softer. If not hope, then at least memory. So here's the final frame the Real ask. In the comments below, describe your feeling after watching these episodes with just one emoji. Are you the eye? The flame? The skull? The bone? Because once you name the feeling, you don't forget it. And that, maybe, is how we stay human.